Hey, welcome to the Pleasure Points podcast. I'm your host, James Rohr. I'm super excited for today's podcast. I'm sitting down with Aimee Barr. She's a licensed clinical social worker who is just a badass therapist, and she's incorporating astrology into her practice as well. So our conversation covered a lot of ground, as they tend to do with the therapists that I sit down with. You can find her at Aimee Barr. That's AIMEEBARR LCSW on Instagram. That's at Aimee Barr LCSW or aimeebarrlcsw.com. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Let's give it up for Aimee Barr. All right, and we are live. Hello. Welcome, Aimee.
Hi.
So I am super stoked because sitting across from me in this room is one of the smartest therapists that I know. This is Aimee Barr. She's a licensed clinical social worker. Did I get that right?
You totally got that right.
And she's just an all-around badass human being, and I'm super excited to have you here. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, I'm super excited to be here. That when I think of true healers that I know, you are definitely like one of the top people that come to mind.
Oh,
so,
my goodness.
You know, it's absolutely true. So I just really appreciate how you focus so much, not only on the body, but really looking at our aura, our spirit, and how everything's connected. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I learned how to put needles in people, and now I have access to incredibly amazing and talented people like you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I know Aimee through Nicole, who was a guest here on the podcast. And Aimee practices right next door to where my office is in Williamsburg. And you also have an office in Union Square?
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
Awesome. And so I'm super excited to get a chance to talk to you about a whole bunch of things. So the things that I'm really interested in are basically anything that pertains to vitality, life force, feeling good. And Jen, who you just met, left. I was like, yeah, I'm interviewing another therapist. And she's like, you have a thing for therapists. And I just love the study of the mind and how people show up. And I wanted to kick off, I was thinking about something before you came over, which is this idea of memory, right? And so, because we know now that memory is flawed. I mean, an eyewitness testimony is it's flawed,
right?
It's like this weird sort of distortion. And I was curious if in the psychological literature, when you guys are talking about people's sort of stories and experiences of the past, what the role of memory is.
So that's really a fabulous question. And what I always like to look at with memory, the thing that's the most important with that is the drama, or we could say the significance of the event, right? So I won't remember what I did 5 minutes ago, who I saw on my way to the store. But if I was tripped on the way to the store and that was dramatic, I'll remember that. Mm-hmm. So the way our memory works is whatever was most potent, most dramatic, when something had a very strong impact, we'll remember it at a much larger level. Now, here's the thing that is tricky, right? When we are highly emotionally attuned, the same part of our brain that controls excitement also controls fear. When we're fearful, we don't remember things as accurately. So that's why when we go to the doctor, we're told, bring somebody with you who can write down those notes, because otherwise we may get information incorrectly. That I always like to say, feelings aren't facts. They're highly relevant, right?
Nice.
Highly relevant, really important, but they're also not facts. So that's the thing with memory. It's about how we perceive it to be. So along those same lines, when something is traumatic, it was true. It was traumatic for us. But if we were going to look at it from a factual standpoint of what happened, it may not necessarily be the same experience. Let's say somebody had a really traumatic experience where they thought they were going to be attacked by a bear. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say the bear wasn't going to attack you. Mm-hmm. Let's say the bear was just popping their head out and was looking for an apple tree. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But your experience was you were about to be attacked by a bear. That was still real for you, regardless of what the bear's intention was. Mm-hmm. So that's what's tricky about memory. It may not be the facts of what actually was going on, but when we have an experience that's traumatic, that's very true for us.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. And so it's an interesting thing, like parsing out sort of how people perceive, like what I talk to a lot of my clients about is like the difference between like the data versus the story, right?
Right.
And so like I remember a friend of mine had her and her sister watched an event that was like very memorable for one of them in particular. The story was that they were like, as I remember it anyway, it was that they were hiding under a table during like some family function, and they saw their father in the kitchen with another woman, and they watched him, or they heard him flirting with this other woman. And in listening to these two people like talk about that event, one of them wrote the story that was like, men can't be trusted. And the other one wrote the story of like, oh, how great is it that like our father is so sensual and like romantic and able to like just sort of like be so full of love and to like be in that sort of like that powerful, sensual way. And it fascinated to me how like two people can witness the same thing and write completely different stories about it.
Absolutely. And where I would go with that, so, there's these ink blot tests called like the Rorschach test, right? So what we found is when we gave those tests to kids who were survivors of sexual abuse, what they would see on those like ink blots would be something sexual. Now, someone who wasn't abused, we would give them those tests and they would see like either like a fence or a house, but it wouldn't be something that was sexualized. So our brain will interpret things based on our past experience, right? So that's why like even with women who are pregnant, all of a sudden they're going to start seeing pregnant women everywhere because our brain is really conditioned to look for patterns. So when we've had a lot of experiences, we are going to look to like replicate that. So that's why it's so important to go to therapy if you've had trauma in your life. Because if you don't have that resolved, what I like to say is we act it out in real time. That whatever we don't deal with on the internal level will act out on the external level. So I would say for like these two women, one of them may have had a very different experience with men that may have gone back further than this incident of seeing her father flirt. Like, I'd be really curious to know what was going on for her earlier in her life, like even from the ages of like 0 to 3 of like, well, what was your first experience of your father? This only validated something that happened beforehand. So like I like to say to clients, we're not upset about the things we think we're upset about. Like we may be upset about because we're upset that a man or a woman that we're interested in, right? Didn't like call us back for a second date. So we're really upset. So I'll have a client come in, I'm really upset. I thought this was going well. And then like, I thought we had a great time and like they never reached out to me. What they're really upset about is feeling unlovable and feeling rejected at a deep core level, because this is someone that they spent 2 hours with, maybe 3 hours with. We spend 2 or 3 hours with a lot of people in our life that we never hear from again, and we don't make a story out of it.
Right.
But if we go to the root of the issue and we go at like really see, well, what's really there, then we can unwrap those stories and see where they permeate from. But unless we deal with those things, we're going to continue to act it out in lifetime.
Interesting. So you're talking a little bit about like attachment styles, right?
Right.
Like I'm reminded when you're talking of that, what's that book? Hold Me Tight.
Yep.
Where in my reading it, not as a therapist, but as an acupuncturist, energy person, and coach and whatever, it's sort of the way, if I could sum it up, it would be like any argument that is had in a relationship is because one or both people feel unsafe.
Yes.
I mean, that's like, there's talking about like a massive oversimplification here.
Right.
But that sort of that idea of safety, and that like, bitching at your partner about the dishes left in the sink or the laundry that wasn't done or the bill that didn't get paid. Like, yeah, these are real things that need to be addressed. But underneath that, it's because somebody feels in some way unsafe.
Absolutely. And where I would go with that, even taking it a step further, and I think that's like a great place to start, we each need to be loved differently. So I like to go to, let me see where your wounds are so I know how to love you. Right? Like if somebody who has what's called more of an anxious attachment, meaning that they really fear rejection and abandonment and they want closeness, they want intensity. The way that they're going to need to be loved is consistency. They're going to need to get a lot of verbal confirmations. They're going to need to have like a lot of physical like attention, and they're going to need to really feel held and safe. Now, someone who has more of a dismissive attachment, which comes from feeling like they can't trust people, that people aren't safe, that they need space, space. So someone like that is going to need space. Like they're going to need to be able to know like, hey, you want to go on vacation by yourself? Totally cool. Check in with me just so like I know you landed safely and have a great time. Enjoy exploring and know I'll be here. I'll be here when you get back. I'm not going to nag you. I'm not going to say, why didn't you want me to come with you? But we need to be loved in different ways, and different ways of being loved will allow us to feel safe. And that's what's so confusing, right? Because we think, you know, there's this like whole thing about like treat people the way we want to be treated. And I hate that because it's a bit narcissistic actually to say that, because we need to look at each person as an individual, and we all have very individualized wounds. And because of that, we need to be loved differently.
Well, how do you feel about the 5 love languages?
I think it's great. I think that's a wonderful, like, you know, thing to like look at with partners. It's a great way of looking at like, how do I want to receive and how do I want to give love? But I'm a much bigger fan of attachment, because I do believe that when someone is feeling controlled, right? Like, let's say like Gary Chapman, like one of their love languages is physical contact. So generally what I find with that quite often like anxious partners will like need a lot of like constant like physical contact of like, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Someone who's avoidant is going to need space, right? So they could give that to their anxious partner, but they also need to be able to get something in return. Otherwise, they're going to feel controlled and the relationship is no longer going to feel safe. So it's great to communicate these things, but then you have to be able to say, okay, well, what's going to work for the relationship? That's what I always like to go at, is that there's partner A's need, and there's partner B's need. And then there's the relationship's need.
Right.
I'm all about let's work on the relationship. Let's look at both of your needs, but let's do it from this place of what is going to be good for the relationship. Like, does the relationship need more affection? Does the relationship need more space? Like, what is it that this relationship needs?
I love that. I love that. Do you do a lot of couples counseling or mostly individuals?
I do individuals that I've been trained through Ackerman and couples counseling. And at some point I may end up doing that, but I love working with individuals because I find that, you know, quite often we look for our partner to fulfill unmet needs within us. And so if I could work with individuals around the relationship stuff, they could show up in a partnership at a whole new level. And what I recommend a lot is that if you're in couples counseling, you should be an individual and vice versa. That I've worked with certain people before individually and said, you know, we're not going to make progress unless you and your partner are in couples counseling, but we could work on your stuff. We could work on your attachment stuff here. But I really love doing the individualized work because I believe if we have self-awareness and self-acceptance, then we can show up in our relationship at a whole other level. That quite often what's challenging in the relationship is two people who aren't meeting their own individual needs. They don't know how to self-soothe. So they show up in this partnership and they're like, help me. And I'm like, that's not looking for love. That's looking for help. That's a very different type of thing. But I could help you one-on-one. So then you could show up in your life and your relationship in a completely different place.
Yeah. So the attachment style, how did they determine? I mean, I know the research or it came from like watching a child, right? With the caregiver in the room, and then the caregiver leaves, and then they observe like how the kid reacts when the caregiver comes back. Are there theories as to like where that attachment style comes up? Like if the mom is, or the caregiver is just totally like non-existent, or is there like a specific sort of point of trauma? Do you know?
Sure. So the way I always like to look at this too, you know, because I think there's no harder job in the world than being a parent. That responsibility to be able to be responsible for an entire other life and never have time off. Like even if like the child is like with other caregivers, you're always there thinking about this child. So I always like to say that because I think there's a lot of blame that goes on when we talk about attachment towards parents. And I always like to start with, we're all doing for the most part the best we can with whatever resources we have. Now, with that being said, children are so empathic, especially during like 0 to 3. We are observing the world. We are all eyes and ears, and we will empath our parents' stuff too. So let's say you have a parent who's exhausted and is like, I don't know if I could do this job. I don't know if I could do this. This is too much. I don't know if I could take care of this child. and you have a kid empathing that their source to life, like they would die if their parent doesn't feed them and doesn't take care of them. And their parent doesn't know if they could do this. And they're empathing that. That's traumatic, right? That your source of life doesn't know if they could do their job. Now, it may not be said verbally, but again, 70% of communication, 70 to 90% actually is nonverbal. And when we're looking at that from a child who's just like learning to form their relationship with the world, so much is going on during that time where they're looking at their parent and they're really like taking in whatever is going on for them. So I always like to know, well, what was mom and dad's, relationship like? Or what were your parents' relationship like when you were like first like forming in the world? How were things financially? And like, what type of like bond did you guys had? Were you breastfed? What were your sleep patterns? Like, what was going on? Because again, parenting, hardest job in the world. And you have parents who aren't sure if they could do this or don't know if they like this. What can happen is a child can internalize, I'm too much, I'm too hard, I'm too difficult, because that's what's going on for the parent. Or the child can empath, I can't trust them. They don't know what the hell they're doing. I need to learn to do this on my own. Right? So it's really looking at those dynamics and looking at frequency. So literature shows that like 30% of the time we need a parent to be attuned. Doesn't have to be 100%, but 30% needs the attunement. Without that 30%, we have insecure attachments, meaning that we're more likely to develop the like avoidant attachment, anxious attachment, and also disorganized attachment as well, which disorganized is the one that's not as well known as the other two, but that comes in cases of abuse and neglect.
Got it.
That happened. So it's complicated. Now, the good news about attachment that I always like to say is that it can be healed, that it's not something that like is a stamp for life. And that's one thing people worry about. They're like, oh my gosh, when they start learning about this stuff, they're like, of course, all my relationships have failed, or of course I keep attracting the same unavailable partners. What do I do? I'm like, well, what you do is you have a corrective experience. And you could even have that in therapy. Like as a secure attachment figure, I'm always on time for my clients, right? Like I'm always going to be nurturing. I'm going to hold them, but I'm going to handle them. So that's important. Like I could hold them and being like, listen, whatever you have to say, I am here to receive it. No matter what you're coming to me with, no matter what you've done, I have unconditional regard for you. But I'm also going to be really direct with you because I care about you, and I'm going to care about you in a way you're not maybe used to. I'm going to tell you when you're messing up. I'm going to tell you when you're doing things that I'm concerned are not going to be to your own benefit. So we can have a model of a healthy relationship. And then it gives people the skills to have that in their own life. They can start looking at their friendships, their romantic partnerships, and say, wow, do I have models of a secure attachment in my life, or am I really just drawing in people who are going to perpetuate that insecure attachment?
I love that. I love that. So hear that, parents? You only need to be on point like 30% of the time.
Yes. Isn't that a relief, right? Like, and it's about attunement there. It's about
attunement there. Can you break that word down? What does that mean, attunement?
So attunement is like, I can look at someone and I can sense what it is that they need. I can be so connected to them that I know that if they're looking at them, that they have a look in their eyes that they're tired. I know that if I'm looking at them and they're like going to like be hungry, I know if I'm looking at them that they're craving to be held. So it's about being that connected to someone that you could sense what they need without them needing to like verbalize it. And that's what happens with the anxious and avoidant partnerships, is that they're not attuned to each other's needs, where the anxious person is like, wait, but you left last weekend. Where are you? I need you here now. And the avoidant is like, whoa, can't you see I'm doing the best I can, but I need space.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means that like, if you don't give me space, I'm going to have to take it in ways that like don't feel so great. So attunement is like both of them looking at each other and being like, okay, you need time. I need space. Let's figure out a way of doing this. Maybe it's that like we like don't live together, or maybe it looks like we do live together, but like every like, weekend, like I need like at least like a Sunday to myself, or I need to go on like a trip with friends and it doesn't include you. But it's like being able to negotiate and to be attuned to each other's needs in that way.
Yeah, I like that. I'm curious what you would think about it, because this idea of attunement is an interesting one. I haven't heard it described that way, because I used to get, not even used to, sometimes it still happens, like kind of annoyed with my son's mother, because I would feel like she would probably make the case, not to speak for her, but she would make the case that she like is anticipating Wyatt's needs and able to understand what he needs. And, she might say that she's attuned to him. And I would say, well, you're just projecting your shit onto him.
Yeah.
Like this example is so stupid, but it's the only one that comes to mind right now. Like, there would be this thing with like socks, and she like, as a kid, she didn't like tight elastic on her socks. And it was like this whole thing. And, we'd be getting Wyatt dressed and she would be like, oh, these socks are too tight. He doesn't like them. He doesn't like them. And I would be like, how do you know that? Like, I was like, I've never put on a pair of socks that I didn't like. Like, it was, you know what I mean? Like, so is that attuned, or is that like her just sort of like, I mean, no, you don't even have to answer it, but it's like,
no, it's a great question, right? Because like, we're not mind readers, but this is what I would look at. How do you know when you have a child who doesn't like something? His face gets scrunchy. He doesn't like it. He's kicking it off his feet. He doesn't like it. He is going to start getting fussy in an hour and he's going to kick them off. He doesn't like it. But it's about being able to like be so connected in that way of saying, no, he doesn't like that, like, that type of music, or no, he doesn't like that food, because you can pick up on cues of what he's doing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and that's not projecting when there's actual like concrete like evidence where you can like see in someone's eyes, in someone's facial expressions, in somebody's body language, what they like and what they don't like.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I just find this stuff to be so fascinating, because then I would even say, well, it's possible that he's like picking up her energy and then he's matching like the vibe. I mean, it's sort of like who's incepting who, right?
Right.
So it's like, is he picking up her vibe and he's feeling her being anxious about his socks, so then he's reacting to that. It also comes down to, I think age might also make a difference. Now, I'm just speaking purely as like a dad, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a divorced dad at that now, but it's like an age thing too, where it's also like, at some point he recognizes that he can manipulate the whole room if he like throws a fit, or if he like starts kicking his socks off, or like making a whole thing. He knows that like his mom's going to pay a lot of attention to that, and he might get like this whole thing. So it's like, there must be like a tipping point somewhere where it's like, one is like kind of what I would call like honest feedback, like you see the face scrunch up, and then the other one, it's like at some point he knows he can play the room.
Yep. And where I would always go with that too, and I think this is like the case not only with kids but with adults, like we can't reward bad behavior. And it's like, if you throw a fit and then you get what you want, that just teaches you to keep throwing fits. In different ways.
Totally.
So it's about being able to say, okay, like I know he doesn't like the socks, but like let's look at how that message could be like construed in a different way.
Yeah, I find all this, I should check out the literature on this stuff, because I find it fascinating. Even the differences between like the way like, a dad might parent versus a mom, and you hear stories like from friends and stuff, like when the mom's around, it's one thing. And then when it's just the dad, it's a whole other thing, and it's like, I think there can be like a mom who thinks that like, oh my God, like he's not attuned, like he's not doing this, like the kid is running around with no clothes on and all that. But it's like the dad is able to provide a different kind of vibe.
Yeah. Well, and I always like to look at yin and yang energies, right? Like that's what it comes down to, or like we need like those energies, right? And both are equally as important. Like we live in New York City, right? Very yang culture here,
right.
All about doing, like productivity, being in action, fast. And inside of that, we lose like the yin, which is all about the intuition. It's all about the inner knowing. It's all about like the sitting and waiting and hearing. And we need both. We need like that yin, like ability to be like, no, this just doesn't feel right. This isn't attuned. Like, and even in acupuncture, that's like the yin stuff, right? Of like what's off balance, what's not working. But then it's like we can meditate all day long, but if we don't act on things, like I always like to say, people quite often are like in the backyard looking for 4-leaf clovers when opportunity is knocking on the front door. Like we have to know to get into action, but we have to know when to get into action. So I think with parenting, it's the same. You need the yin and the yang. So that can happen in regardless of the parent gender, of like bringing in like the yin and the yang energies and saying, how are we able to balance this of like getting into action, knowing when we need to like be able to like move things forward, but also sitting back, listening, being attuned, being aware, being like receptive to receiving.
Yeah, I love that. So along those lines of timing, let's talk about a topic that is near and dear to your heart, I understand now, that you're developing into your practice with bringing astrology into your psychotherapy practice.
Yes, I can get so excited about it. You were absolutely right that I do believe that psychology doesn't go deep enough, that I like to think that we are all like similar to having like the weather outside, right? Like it's fall, boot season is starting, whatnot, that we also have like an energetic forecast too. And I do see a lot of really incredible patterns in looking at our own ecosystems and seeing how each of us interact with the world in a very different way. And actually, I'm not the first therapist to, be interested in this, that like, if we look at like Carl Jung, that like he also really was into looking at astrology too. And there's been a whole like school in London of like the psychological school of astrology.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, founded by, I think, Liz Green founded it. So it is a whole practice, but I think it's a really great way of not pathologizing people and just like looking at who are they as an ecosystem, like, and let's look at the timing of your life, because I think so often we come to therapy because we're so angry we haven't achieved a certain status yet, whether it's a relationship status or a job status or, you name it. Like, and we're so frustrated because we're like, why has this not happened for me? What am I doing wrong? Fix me. And so when appropriate, I'll bring the astrology piece in because I'll say, well, we have timing in our life and we're meant to learn certain lessons. And some of us are meant to go through certain journeys and we can miss it if we're focusing in the wrong places. But if we kind of lean into where we're meant to be, things kind of happen organically. And it's not always the life that you envisioned for yourself. But my whole thing with people, and I get annoyed sometimes when I see like too much coaching on like finance coaching, like even relationship coaching, because I just feel like on some level, like we have to be more us. Like that's what this life is about, is like, how do I learn who I am and then live that life that I'm meant to be living for myself and really learn to love that. And then you learn things along the way. Like you learn things about how to be a better partner. You learn things about how to take risks financially. But it all comes from what our life path is. We're all meant to be doing different things. So I think the astrology can really help people understand like more along the lines of like what their path is and also the timing of things. Like what would be the best use of their timing right now? What lessons are they here to learn now? And then we could also look at it from a compatibility standpoint of if you have parents who have a very different ecosystem than you, what was it like growing up in that house? Or you might have a partner that has a very different ecosystem or a child. I mean, and we can look at it from a non-pathological place of like, who are each of these human beings and what is it that they bring as a gift, but also like, what are their learning areas? Like, what are they here to learn? What are they here to contribute? What are they here to work through?
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I find myself talking a lot in my practice is like basically sort of like, I don't like the term validating because who am I to validate, but like putting things in context. Like one of my clients, she's talking about all this anxiety that she has and, one of her kids is sick and they're like doing trips to the doctor and all this stuff. And it's like her anxiety is completely appropriate. And it's like, there's nothing that I'm hearing that is like what I would consider anywhere close to inappropriate.
Right.
And I would imagine that when you add in their kind of like the full sort of constellation of their life, their energetics and their being, that it's like there's something about context that really makes a big difference. And like the part of what I struggle with when I'm doing the like positioning as a dating coach is I don't like feeding into this idea of self-improvement. And I think that's kind of what I was hearing when you're talking about it, where it's like at some point, like fucking enough already. Like, let's stop with the self-improvement. Like, be who you are. Maybe don't be so awful, but like,
Yeah.
just enjoy the experience. And like, I'm a big believer in like paying attention, and what are we paying attention to? Well, a lot of what I talk about is like, we're paying attention to context, and I love how you're bringing in like the astrological work to provide another avenue of context that can really help people like put their mind and their heart at ease, and I think that like giving people some knowledge and information where they can just kind of take a deep breath and settle into themselves and be like, maybe if I don't spend as much time like trying to improve myself and instead focus on, am I living the life that I want to be living?
Right.
It's like they're two very, very different questions.
And the life I'm meant to be living, like, let's look at it away from what we're culturally conditioned for, too.
Love that.
Right? Like, not only on a micro level, but a macro level. We have to look at both. And I think we live in a really interesting time right now where we're able to, like, reevaluate, like, as women, even, like, what it is that our roles are, right? And how it is that we want to be and should be respected, treated, and, like, looking at, like, different, like, stereotypes that are being, perpetuated in so many ways. And same with men too, of like looking at that, because I think there is like toxic masculinity and just a lot of projections put on people of who they have to be, like women and men. Like, and it's like, let's like open this up a little bit more so we can really like get to know who we are aside from who we were projected that we needed to be for ourselves, for the world, for our families, like all of this stuff. And you're right. Like, I think pain is very appropriate. Like, think about what would happen if we touched a stove and we never felt pain. Our hand would burn off. Like,
right.
We need to feel pain in order to understand when we are going somewhere that we're not meant to go. And we can use our pain as a teacher. Like, when people leave the gym and they're hurting, they're not like saying, oh, why did I work out today? Like, unless they pulled something, right? But like, let's say that they did squats and the next morning they're feeling it. That's a good feeling. They worked out hard. They got something accomplished, but we need to look at our own emotional pain the same way. That if we go through a breakup that is, just awful, we want to look at what is there that we're healing here. Maybe it's this line in the sand of saying, you know what? I knew this person was not the right one for me on date 3, but I kept dating them because the attraction was so hot. And maybe moving forward, they'll be able to say, okay, I was down that road before and I overlooked some major things to me. I'm not going to do that anymore. That pain taught me something really valuable, but we need to like use our pain as a teacher because it's brilliant and it helps us grow. And the resiliency is really important. That I love working with people around being resilient because I'm like, if you want to live a great life, get prepared to fail. Get prepared to like fall down on your face a whole bunch of times. Get prepared to like learn the hard lessons. But that's where we get like, those extraordinary moments because we work for them. And we like know ourselves well enough to know how to appreciate something great in front of us.
So should we talk about Saturn returns?
Oh, sure. Yes, let's do it.
I'm sure a lot of women out there listening to this, and I know it can be especially confounding around relationship stuff, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of different transits that are really very unique that and I'll focus on like the first Saturn return, right? That happens
around like 30.
Yeah, like a little bit before 30, like, during that time break. And it's really looking at like Saturn is like, it's a planet that will teach us the hard lessons to work through. So when we have a Saturn return, it returns to the same place in our chart when we were born, and it will show up there again. So Saturn is like, okay, let's get to it. Like when I had a big Saturn transit, it was when I built my business and I worked really hard for 2 years and I got rewarded at the end of the Saturn. I had a great business that I had, but I had to work really hard for it. So when we have our Saturn return, we're going through these really big lessons that we have to work very hard for. So depending on what house in our chart it's in, like if you have a Saturn return in your like 7th house of relationships, you're going to be working really hard on relationships then. If you have it in your house of health in 6, you're going to be working really hard around your health, but you're going to get those like really hard lessons that will set the course for the next like 30 years of your life. So it's a really monumental time because what we're really looking at is a rite of passage of saying, wow, I'm not a kid anymore. Like even through my 20s, it's really easy to think that you're still a child in so many ways because you're out of school, you're trying certain jobs, you might be traveling, maybe you'll be going back to grad school, and then all of a sudden things hit. Oh, do I marry this person I've been dating for years who I don't know if I really want to?
Mm-hmm.
I studied to be a lawyer, but do I really want to do this? I always thought I did. I don't know. Do I want to stay in this city? Do I want to go somewhere else? Do I want to have kids? It's like all of those really big questions will pop up for us around those times of what do I want to do as an adult? And it's scary, very scary. It's a very challenging time in the sense that you can't run away from yourself anymore. And it can also be a really wonderful opportunity to grow during those times, but it takes hard work. And that's the whole thing about Saturn is that you have to work hard and you could get rewarded, but it's not easy. You can't coast when you have Saturn somewhere. Saturn wants you to work. It wants you to like gain those lessons. It wants you to see your limitations, where the planet Jupiter, which is all about expansion and it brings in a lot of luck, Saturn brings in our like limitations and like hard work. So we want to look at like all of these different planets, you know, inside of our ecosystem to see what are they here to say about us? What are they here to like tell us about our soul's journey inside of it? Because then we don't have to say, ugh, I'm doomed in relationships or, ugh, I'm doomed in health. It's like, nope, this is just like what you're here to like bring some hard work in. Where people have Saturn in their chart, I often see that's the area they become an expert in. So if someone has Saturn in like, let's say they're like, house of, I'm just going to pick a random house. Let's say they have Saturn in like their second house, which is like about finance and self-worth. They may have had to learn some hard lessons around money. And they may have grown up without money in certain ways. And then they use that opportunity to learn a lot about money, to work hard, and then become financial experts. But it becomes like through that hard stuff. Saturn in the 7th. They get married later in life, or they've had challenges around relationships. They become relationship experts, you know, but it's through those hard lessons of needing to work. Saturn in the 6th, they may have had health problems that they had to really work through. They become holistic health teachers or practitioners, or they become doctors, or they really focus on health and wellness. So like, all of this stuff is here to contribute. Like I always like to say, our life isn't just for us, you know, even though we think it is. It's not. It's about our life is better. And I do believe as human beings, we're so much happier when we're able to utilize our talents to make a difference for others because we get back what we give. But we need to look at, well, what is it that we're here to give naturally as opposed to what do I want to do when I get older? Well, let's look at who you are. Let's look at what innate talents you have. And we could do that by looking at the astrology chart.
Awesome. I'll have to have you look at my chart.
I would love that.
I have I have like 5 or 6 things all in Leo.
Oh, that happens with Leo all the time. I love that because like we have to look at Leo. It's the sun, right? Bright. Like it takes up space. Like I always say, I know a Leo when I walk in the room because the energy goes to them. Like that they have a way of like bringing in the energy. But Leo is like the one sign that I usually see like it's like the lion, right? Like king of the jungle. So there's like a lot of them there. Like when it's in like their chart, there's like a lot of like fiery, like great, like Leo energy. So much creativity with Leos, like leadership, generosity. And it's about also learning in this life that being the best isn't everything, because that's the thing with Leos. It's like, wait, if I'm not the best, then who am I? And it's like, be generous and creative. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, a buddy of mine is, he's a therapist down in Miami, and he's big in the Enneagram. So he's like, he teaches like around the country with the Enneagram stuff. And I think I was a 3, which is like their motto is like strives like to be excellent. And like that's certainly something that like, you know, was a theme certainly growing up, you know, and it's something that I have to like, I've had to do a lot of like daily sort of practicing of gratitude and being thankful and like celebrating even the small wins instead of only using the metric of like, was I the best? Did I finish at the top? Have I like totally excelled? because that was leading to unhappiness.
Yeah.
So do you like what do they call them? The synastry or synastry, like where like you get a couple, like they run their chart together, and do you like look at the couple's chart?
I don't look at anyone's chart without their permission unless it's a parent-child situation, because I think that inside of that, we could do like a lot of healing and growth work. Now, people always want me to look at the charts of their partner all the time,
Sure.
but I do feel like there's an invasion of privacy there to a degree, in the sense of like, well, let's look at your chart. Let's look at your life path. Let's like,
Right.
and people do that with the attachment stuff of like, oh my gosh, like I think my partner is this. And then they want to know how to deal with a partner who is like avoidant. Usually that's what I get. I'll usually have like an anxious client wanting,
trying to manipulate her
Right.
energy field.
right. Like, how do I change this to like deal with like, and I'm like, well, let's look at like getting you closer to secure.
Right.
Like, let's not worry about what's going on with like this partner. Like they'll deal with themselves or they won't, but this is about you being you. And
Right.
like, why would you ever want to be with someone who can't accept you for you? And quite often our attachment wounds are part of who we are, right? But it doesn't mean that we can't grow. And that's what I always like to look at, is that we need to be accepting. We need to work with what we have. Always work with what you have. And then from there, saying, how can I grow? How can I create an environment that life will be kinder to me inside of this environment? Like if someone has some natural artistic talents and they love that and feel really like lit up through like art and creativity, but they're working in finance, I don't know if life is being really kind to them if they're not able to like exercise their talent. It doesn't mean they have to quit their day job, but what it does mean is that they need to make time for their talents and utilize them in some way, and like, you know, allow themselves to really explore the things that light them up.
I love that. I love that. So you do a lot of work with people going through transitions. What is it about that really excites you?
I love people who are ready to go. Like I tend to be pretty action oriented as a therapist, that even though I've done Psychoanalytic Institute, which is all about looking at our attachment wounds, our early childhood experiences, I'm a big believer that we need to be able to take action steps in order to change. And so when someone's at a transition place, they're ready to go. They're ready to say, okay, ready or not, I want to jump off that diving board. I don't want to stay where I am anymore. And I think that inside those moments, great opportunities for self-exploration is possible. And they could create like new patterns that can last them a lifetime.
Jumping back to the attachment style thing here for a second. So how much matters with who they're interacting with? Like, could you have somebody who's anxious in one relationship, but then they like become avoidant in another? Like, I know there's a predominant one, but do you ever see it where it like totally flips, or is it just a matter of like taste where they're like, I just don't like that guy?
You know, it can shift depending on the relationship. I have seen that before, where people can go from like anxious to avoidant. Generally, when I see that happening, it goes more like if someone's baseline is anxious and they start acting avoidant, it does stem from really not feeling compatible inside of a relationship. So they'll start having those, you know, traits, which is why they'll get anxious when someone's acting that way towards them, where really they may just be dating a dismissive person and it's not personal even. The best relationships have at least one person who is secure.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. That like, you know, do you both need to be secure? Well, the happiest couples are. But if you have one person who's secure, then it allows the other person to grow to being secure. So if I could work with people to grow their security level, they may decide they may not even want to be with the partner they're with. They may like decide they want something totally different. But it's about growing yourself as a secure person. That's really the goal.
All right, so let's kick this to very practical steps for our listeners.
Okay.
So what advice would you give to somebody who is an anxious attachment person?
So I think people who are anxious have been given a rap of being needy. That people who are anxious feel they're needy, and their partners will say that they're needy. So what I like to say is that we're only needy when we have unmet needs, right? So what we really need to do as somebody who's anxious is be vulnerable and to be able to really share what it is that we need. We get hurt a lot less when we're honest from the very beginning. People who are anxious, the biggest mistake they make at the beginning of their relationship is pretending they're not. It's very different to say at the very beginning, listen, at times I worry that my partner is going to leave me. So I need a good morning text and I need like a good night text. That stuff, just getting those two things makes a huge difference for me. And then you see how the person responds. They may be like, that's too much. That's crazy. That's your problem. You need to get past it. But then you have to ask yourself as an anxious person, is this going to be the right partner for me? Because if you know you have certain needs, and if you don't get them met, you're going to start acting needy in ways you don't like. You have to take care of yourself through being vulnerable and sharing what those needs are from the very beginning. Don't lie to yourself, anxious people. Hear me? Do not lie to yourself. Be honest about the challenges you have and just share what you need. It may not work for everyone, but it's going to blow up anyway if you like try to hide it.
I love that. I was facilitating a talk this weekend among men and women, and we were talking about, there was a question about vulnerability. And there was, it was like a question of like vulnerability and like honesty. The words were sort of being used a little bit interchangeably. And I'm not sure that that's entirely like a fair sort of word change to make. But the kind of the conclusion that I came to and listening to this whole conversation about it is that like context and delivery makes a big difference. So like, you know, how are you being vulnerable or how are you being honest? How are you saying that? And like one of the things I work on with my clients a lot is like, if you're sharing something, do it in a way that is an invitation for the person to like meet you where you want to be met. As opposed to like, well, I need a text like this because otherwise, like where it's like sort of barriers or like hurdles to be cleared. Instead, just be like, hey, like, I like you. I like where this is going, and I don't want to like do crazy shit. So like, if you send a text in the morning or like check in on me, like that'll take me like along. That will help me be much more present with you and help us to get to know each other better.
Yep, that's perfect. And it's like a way of letting somebody know how they could win. Because here's the deal. You like someone, you want to win for them. You want to know what it is that's going to make them happy.
Right.
Just like that. And you say it in the positive, right? Like of, hey, when you sent me that good morning text the other day, that was so awesome. It made my day. Like it was great. And I realized that getting those makes a huge difference for me.
Yeah. And certainly like I'll just speak from like a dude's perspective, like that hits like two things that we love. One, we get to know how to be useful, right? We get to like know exactly where you want us to be and like how to reach you. And two, like you stroke our ego. Like you're like, oh, that was so great. You know, it's like, those are both huge wins for dudes. Like we don't need a lot. And, you know, I think part of the issue with guys dating like the really successful, like very sort of young, dominant woman is that they don't know where they fit in her life. And so like a great byproduct of like having that vulnerability is it's an opportunity, like it's very clear where it's like, well, I could use you here, you know, like I'm inviting you into my life in this way. And it's not like a little thing, but like you actually, there's the potential here for you to like have a big place in my life, even though from the outside it may seem like I've got the job, I've got the friends, I've got the vacations, I got the Instagram, I got the whatever, but making it very, very clear of like where you need to be met and where this person can fit into your life.
Perfect. That sounds great. And I have advice for those who are dismissive also, by the way, because I think that advice is a little different. Pace yourself. People who are more avoidant or dismissive will fall very quickly and will fall out very quickly too. So they fall in love with fantasy at times. That happens a lot because they move fast. Like that, you know, when you live in a world where you don't need people and you want connection, but you're scared of it, that you're going to move very fast when you see something that you feel like could be it. And then you'll also get scared away very quickly too. So what I would say is plan activity dates, like go out and like do things together, have fun in person, slow things down sexually because we bond sexually. And when you move at such a fast rate and then you see something you don't like, you're going to freak out. So we want to really pace it more because if you need your independence and you need your freedom, take your time. Take your time. Don't move super fast. So that's what I would say. And that what is hard is with someone who's anxious, they love someone who moves fast because they feel rescued, they feel saved, they feel chosen. But what they don't realize is a whole fantasy is being projected on them.
I like that. That's a great piece. I just had a client, this acupuncture client who I think she tends to be a little bit more on the anxious side. And she was telling me about this guy that she met, and he was like already planning like a vacation in Italy for them, and like, you know, had all of this stuff. And it was like, he was like dreaming big. And, you know, I was like, I was a little concerned about that, right? It's like, sounds a little too much, too fast, all that stuff. And I texted her and I like a little bit later, and I was like, hey, like, how's it going with the romance? And she had this great line. She was like, I feel a ghosting coming on. She was like, he's still talking to me, but it's the frequency has gone from like many, many times a day to like, you know, once a day, maybe once every other day. And she's like, I feel like he's, you know, just going to totally disappear.
Yeah.
Which he did.
Right. And it's hard. It's really hard because like we all want love, right? Like we do. I believe that with anxious and avoidant people, we want love, but the way we love is different. So with someone who's anxious, be really direct about what you need. You know, do it in a way of it being an invitation, right? Be vulnerable about who you are. Someone who's avoidant, slow it down. Like really slow it down. Get to know someone. Do not project fantasy. Get to know them. Take your time. Like, do not say I love you on a third date, or, you know, like, do not send these messages of like, I think I'm going to marry you early on. It's like, that's too much pressure.
Right.
You know, it's too much pressure. Not only are you putting that on yourself, because that feels terrible when you realize, this isn't the right person. Because who wants to break someone's heart? It's the worst feeling. You don't want to break someone's heart, but in order to avoid that, slow it down.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So how many dates do you wait until you ask your partner when his birthday is?
That's so great. You just scope it out on your own. No, you do the research, right? Like, yeah, it's a fun thing to look at, though. I really do believe that. But I will go here. You know, there's certain people that we're going to always be more compatible with, and it makes life easier. Like, you know, it's easier to date someone who's secure than it is to date someone who's avoidant or anxious. But we can't help who we fall for. And that's part of our karmic lessons, right? But it's about then being willing to get to know who someone is. Being willing to get to know who someone is. When I look at compatibility, though, I will look at three things more than anything else. Great. And I'll look at somebody's rising sign. That's like somebody's representative, if you will. So it's almost like a spaceship, right? And then there's the person who walks out. But the spaceship is what you see first. So your rising sign is like your representative, who like somebody thinks you are. So where I'm a Pisces, but my rising is Aquarius. So I'm actually appear much more social than I am. That much more like bubbly and social than I am, because Aquarius is very social. Pisces are more like, you know, filled with emotion and, you know, filled with a lot of like depth to them, but you won't see all of that when you first meet me. You'll see more of the bubbly side. So then your sun sign, which is all about what you inherit from your paternal side, right? Like the sun is like actually the paternal. And then so that's what we read about in like horoscopes is like our sun, the paternal, goes into, we could even argue, a patriarchal society where we're seeing our sun sign, where the moon, that's why we have moon circles, because the moon is all about the feminine. And that's where like we look at like our menstrual cycle is even like around the moons in different ways, whether it's a full moon or we're looking at or new moon. So that's what we get from our maternal, and that's our emotions. So like where I'll use myself again, that my moon is in Virgo. So emotionally, I'm great in a crisis. I'll be like, let's have a plan. Let's figure out what to do. Virgos love to be of service. Emotionally, I don't know how not to help people. So if I'm not doing it at work, I'll do it in my personal life. So it's a good thing that I have a helping profession at work, so I won't drive people in my personal life crazy with wanting to help and fix, right? But like, it's something I can't help, but that's like what I get from the maternal, right? And then I look at the paternal. I get like the creativity, the intuition, the depth. And then I have the rising, which is the Aquarius. So we look at those three things because this is what happens. Like, let's say you don't like someone's rising sign. Every time you're at a dinner party, every time you're like out to dinner, you'll be thinking, will this person just shut up? Will they stop talking? Or they'll be like, or it'll be the reverse of like, why are they not talking? They're just sitting there like a mute. This is so boring because we don't like their rising sign. We don't like their outward personality. And that's a problem in relationships if we don't like somebody's outward rising. It's also a problem with roommates. We should know what somebody's rising and moon is, their emotions. Someone who has like, a fiery moon, like a moon in Aries, they are going to feel things really sharply, really fast, and they're not going to be able to hold back with it. And then someone else who has a moon in Taurus, much slower. Like they'll take their time. They're going to like want to like process it a little bit. So it's always important to know like where's somebody's moon, where's somebody's rising, where's someone's sun. There's so much more to astrology than that, but I would say as like a quick 101 thing.
Oh, that's great.
It's a great thing to look at because then you know what you're in for and you don't have to try to fix each other.
Yeah, I've got to do some research. I know she's a Taurus, and I was talking when she and I first started hanging out, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an astrologer, and I was like, the part of me wants to be excellent in Leo and be loved and adored, and I was like, hey, like, I don't know, like I'm afraid that like I might not be able to like come up with all sorts of new creative things that might keep her interested. And I don't know where I was coming up with that, but my friend was just like, don't worry about it. She's a Taurus. She likes the same shit over and over again. If she likes something, you could do that through the end of time and she will be happy.
Right. Yeah. And what I like to look at, this is so true. This is so great. Like I like to look at what would we be in nature, right? Like, cause if we are an ecosystem, so like fire, Leo, and then earth, Taurus. So what does fire and earth make? They make bricks. So it's like, what are you guys meant to do? Build things together.
Oh, nice.
Right? Like, isn't that cool? So it's like, what would you meant to do? Like, or what would your ecosystem look like? Like Taurus is about fertility and beauty and like flowers. Like when I see a rose garden, total Taurus. What is Leo? The sun. So what would you guys be in nature? It would be like this, like, beautiful sun, like over like roses.
Oh, nice.
So like, that would be like your ecosystem, right? So what's missing though there is like water and air. So at times you may need to like tap into the emotions a little bit more, or you might need to like come up with like some new creative ideas that are there in order for like those flowers to really bloom.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's like looking at that. And that's what I always like to say is like, let's look at your chart and see what you would be in nature.
Yeah. I love that. One of the similarities with my practice. So when I was in college, I studied archaeology and anthropology, and then I got into the acupuncture stuff, and now taking some of that stuff into the relationship coaching. It's all about like looking at the entire environment. So as an archaeologist, right, you can't just pull a piece of pottery out and make all these sweeping conclusions. It's like, what was the context that you found the piece of pottery? What was the context that the orbital bone was in? And you want to get a sense of everything that was around it, and that feeds into the interpretation of it. And Chinese medicine is the same way. It's like we don't just take one symbol or one symptom and make a sweeping conclusion just based on that one thing. It's like, well, what's that context? So like when people are seeing an acupuncturist and they ask a gazillion questions, they're like, my shoulder hurt. Why is he asking about like how my bowel movements are? And it's like, because it's the entire context in the environment in which it's happening. And I love that with the relationship stuff. And I think you just bring such a great added layer with the astrology. And I know that, the clients that we share in common, they just absolutely love the work that you do. And I think it's great. And this kind of innovation and this creativity that you're bringing to your practice is so refreshing. And it's not just about like rehashing the past to just sort of like, have a bunch of people like mentally masturbating about their history. It's like, it's much more about, hey, what are we doing? What are we going to create? This is like what your chart is saying. This is, what your personality type is saying. This is what your attachment style is saying. So let's come up with this action plan and like go create the life that you love. Yeah.
That's what it's really all about. Right. And like, let's honor the life that you have. Especially in social media, we do a lot of social comparison. And I think that's the death of us sometimes when we're looking at other people's highlight reels and saying, why is that not me? We're all meant to be doing different things with our life. And to really honor our journey, that's what I want for people. Like honor that journey that you're meant to have. We don't see dogs trying to be cats. Right? Like we don't see that. Like, and like, what's to say that one animal is better than the other? They just have different functions. And that's the same with us too.
I love that. That's a great note for us to end on. So let people know how they can find you. Where can you be reached?
Sure. So follow me on Instagram. Find me at Aimee, Aimee. Barr, Barr, LCSW. So you could follow me there on Instagram, and also on my website you can go to, which is aimeebarrlcsw.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aimee, for coming. We'd love to have you back.
Great.
And you guys check her out. She's doing amazing work. Remember the name, because you're going to be hearing a lot more from her in the next few years for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank
this
you
was
so
great.
much. All right. Have a good one, guys.